These are the books that I am reading this week. You see, readers are leaders and leaders are readers. I have so many fans asking me how do I read so much and how to improve my reading speed. You see, one of the things I did early on in my career, at a very young age, I actually took a speed reading course, and it has helped me tremendously. Now, it's very interesting because I made a number of videos on this. You can see sometimes the ignorance of social media. I saw comments from some people. They say, "Oh, Dan, I thought you said, don't read books." And then they say, "How come you're now talking about reading books?" They actually have not watched my videos. The thumbnail said, "Don't read books." But in the video itself, I talked about I use books. I don't just read books. But they haven't even watched the video, right? That's how ignorant most people are. Anyway, side story. Tip number 1. When you're reading a lot of books, you don't just want to read books. If you're reading nonfiction, you want to use books. Meaning you're not trying to memorize everything that the author is talking about. One of the very first tips and one of the most important tips I could give you when it comes to books is you want to use books. Because knowledge is one thing. What we want to do is take what's in here, understand it, and then be able to implement and get a result. It's not a contest of memorization. It's a contest for execution and implementation. So every time I read a book, my goal is to want to get 3 ideas out of each book that I can implement right away. That's it. I'm not trying to implement everything the author talks about. I'm looking for just 3 things that I could get out of it. That is it. I want to implement, I want to see how it works for me personally and what I could learn from that. So number 1, don't read books, use books. Number 2, one of the strategies in the speed reading course that I learned from is when you are reading, use your finger. Use your finger to trace. So instead of reading this way, right, when you use your finger, you're actually training your eyeballs to be able to read faster. So when I read, it'll look something like this. Right? Then I flip. That's kind of the reading speed. This is how I can go through. If I'm very, very, very busy, I would do 1 book a week, right? A few months ago, I was very busy. I didn't have time to read. Now, I have more breathing room, so now I can go through 2, 3, 4 books a week. Sometimes 5, 6 books a week if I feel like it. If I have 1 full day, I could go through this in a day. Probably 3, 4 books in a day, right? Extract 2, 3 ideas. That's like tip number 2. So use your finger to trace. The third thing you could do, which is a pretty neat trick, that if the book is relatively new, unlike this book is, about Disney, about Walt Disney, and this would be an older book, so it doesn't have Audible. But for newer books that has Audible, what I would recommend is a cool little trick that you get the physical version of it, as well as the Audible version of it. Then when you're reading the book, you actually play the audio book at 1.25 or 1.5 speed. So you're playing it and you're also reading at the same time. What it does is it helps with your retention. At the same time, you're learning how to read faster because you're speeding up with the Audible, right? And you will learn a lot more. You will actually learn a lot more. So that's a very nice little trick that you could do to be able to improve your reading speed. And the last tip I have for you is the more you read, the faster you read. Because let's say if this is the first time you are reading a marketing book, it would feel overwhelmed. You're not so sure. By the time you're like myself, I've read hundreds and hundreds of marketing books and advertising books. You will see a lot of patterns that are very similar. So then in my mind, I could already skip those things. I already know it. So I'm looking for things that I might not know, that I might overlook, so that I'll be able to go through, let's say a book, I go through a table of content. Yep, I already know that. I heard of that before. Don't need it, don't need it. I'm already doing it, don't need it. So as I'm going through it, then I'll be able to see, oh, here's a chapter that I never thought of, something that I could use before. So here's something I could take out of it and I could use it. I sometimes don't even read through the entire book. If when I get to chapter, let's say chapter 5, I already have my 3 ideas. What I would do is I would close the book. I would go implement the book and put it away. Sometimes I would come back to revisit the book. This is why I reread books in a couple months. Sometimes I don't even come back and revisit the book. I've implemented those 3 ideas, now I'm reading something else. But you see patterns when you read enough. So it is a habit. It's no good to just read one book and then you stop, or here's a great book and then you stop. It's like, I get the questions all the time where, what book should I read? All of them. Because if you're looking for, that magical one book that will change your life. No, read my book, read everybody else's books. Learn from it. Have the habit of reading. The books that you don't read can help you. Period. Right? And if someone spent their lifetime, spending years, putting everything they know, decades of knowledge, into a few hundred pages, and you can get it for 10, 20 bucks, I mean, it is a bargain. It is a bargain, right? And nowadays, people don't read anymore. People are even too lazy to watch a YouTube video. They just watch the thumbnail. They see the thumbnail, and they thought they've watched the video. Unfortunately, that's where we're at in terms of our society. However, if you do read, if you just read a book a month, 12 books a year, it will give you a huge, huge advantage, unfair advantage over everybody else. So comment below if this makes sense. Tell me what are some of the books you're going to read and use, right? And what are some new habits you are going to develop when it comes to reading. You've already built a thriving business, but the question is, how do you scale fast without burning out? How do you transition out of the day-to-day operations so you can make more profits and have more time and freedom? The answer is not some magical software that makes your life easier, and it's not hoping you could outsource all these problems to some agencies. If you want to know the secrets of how the top 0.1% entrepreneurs create high-performing and self-managed teams, join us for our upcoming SMART Challenge. Click the link below to secure your seat today.